Hello, folks. Welcome back to another compilation of strange and spooky wilderness stories sent to me by our listeners. With the summer season in full swing, I wanted to give you a little something to listen to while you're sitting around that campfire or just getting settled in for the night. So here you go. There's an old church at the edge of town where my friends and I gather to play a little basketball. The church sits at the edge of pristine wilderness that stretches on forever. Out here in Maine, we have a bit of a tick problem, so most people aren't dumb enough to play in those woods. Well, one hot and muggy evening in August, my buddies and I played ball for hours until the mosquitoes decided to join us. One by one, we left the court until it was empty, and I was the last one to leave. But before I did, I wanted to practice my free throws a bit before heading home. I must have taken a half a dozen shots, but on the last one, I airballed it. In my frustration, I kicked the ball straight up, sky high, or so I thought. Instead, the ball launched itself into the nearby woods, right into a nasty patch of thorny brush and dark woods, disappearing out of sight altogether. As I stood there contemplating on whether or not it was worth retrieving, something really odd happened. Well, the ball popped out of those bushes and bounced right back onto the court, before rolling perfectly right up to my shoes. And I mean perfectly. As I peered out into the woods, there was a child's giggle that emanated out of him. Even in that hot and humid night, a cold chill swept over me, as I knew nobody in their right mind would be out there in those woods. At this point, darkness set in, and so did my adrenaline. But in that moment, I found myself calling out, asking, quote, "Who's there?" But there was no reply. I immediately grabbed my ball and went back to my truck, my eyes never leaving those woods. I just knew this wasn't a prank because everyone else was accounted for, and everyone had left moments prior. The scary thing is, I was actually going to retrieve my ball, but then that happened a second before I could do it. I guess in a way I am thankful I didn't have to go after that ball, and that it was returned to me. But the burning question remains, who or what threw it back to me? I can tell you this much, it was no child. Morris. Story 2. On the night of July 4th of this year, my family and I found a secluded spot to camp out on the shores of Lake Michigan, far away from anyone else and completely surrounded by dense white pine forest. We spent our days swimming, sunbathing, and barbecuing, followed by a gnarly water gun battle and small fireworks. You know, the loud and obnoxious ones. It was me, my two sisters, my aunt, my uncle, Mom and Dad, and our dog Tucker. Well, the 8 of us were having a blast, literally. We let off sparklers, snapdragons, and cherry bombs. When it came time to light off the smoke bombs, Tucker went crazy and began barking at the thick cloud of smoke that funneled out of him. The funny thing was, these weren't loud at all, so we couldn't understand why he was responding to them the way he did. My uncle joked that Tucker must have really liked these. But it wasn't an excited bark, and believe me, I knew the difference. It was of the protective kind, like if a stranger walked up to the house and peeked in through the window. That's the kind of bark it was, and it wouldn't stop. We each took our turn trying to calm him down, but Tucker was completely fixated on that smoke. Let's just say it wouldn't take me long to see why. There in that smoke was the figure of something tall and skinny. Even as the smoke permeated, that outline remained as if staring back at Tucker, and then my younger sister saw it and screamed. She immediately ran over to my parents and pointed at the smoke that still hovered over the campsite. We all saw it now. It must have been 7 feet tall, dark, and stood frozen in that smoke until the air cleared. Well, whatever it was, it seemed to disappear with the smoke, and had Tucker not alerted us, we would have never even noticed this creepy anomaly. Of course, we were all too freaked out to stay any longer after that, so we grabbed our gear and left the beach. I believe that whatever this thing was had some kind of special ability to blend into the natural environment around it. But fortunately for us, that fireworks smoke gave us a glimpse of this eerie being. How long had this thing been watching us for? What did it want? And of course, what in the hell was it? My family and I are still pretty freaked out, but thankful that Tucker was there to alert us. Thank you for sharing my story, Caleb. Story 3. My buddy and I spend every other weekend or so hitting the trails to stay in shape and get away from the wife and the kids. On this particular day, we set out on the Devil's Slide Trail near Idlewild, California, which is a 2.5-mile moderate trail that ascends from Humber Park to Saddle Junction, with plenty of switchbacks and stunning views of San Jacinto Peak, the Palm Springs Aerial Tram, and the Taquitos Peak Fire Lookout Tower. Well, about halfway up the trail, we come across a small black backpack right in the middle of it. Scattered around the backpack were personal items and clothing that appeared to belong to a man. And I mean everything was there, including socks, underwear, khaki shorts, and a tank top. My buddy pointed out something really interesting. A pair of Bluetooth headphones sliding slightly off to the side of the trail. This told us that whomever abandoned those items did so in a hurry. We decided to peer into the backpack for any sign of identification, but all we found was a bag of trail mix, a bottle of Gatorade, and a book on the German language. A seemingly normal array of items for someone heading out on a short day hike, and they looked like they had just been placed there, waiting for us to stumble across it. We hadn't seen any other vehicles in the parking lot, or anyone else on the trail that morning, so we found it quite odd. My first thought was that this was the product of someone else's misfortune. That was until we reached the end of Devil's Slide, near Saddle Junction, only to come across a naked, middle-aged man lying in a fetal position in a clearing that overlooked miles of pristine forest and rocky terrain. Of course, the two of us rushed to the guy's aid, and to our surprise, he was still alive, but was completely out of it. It was at this time we both got a strange feeling that something was observing us from the woodline, and that feeling never left until emergency services would eventually arrive an hour later. When we made that call, we could hear the police chatting in the background, singing something along the lines of, quote, "I think it's our guy." We assumed this was a missing hiker who had been reported missing the previous day, and it turns out we were correct. About a week after the incident, we had learned that the hiker set out on the afternoon of the previous day and completely went missing. He had been dropped off by a friend and was supposed to meet him back on the trailhead at a designated time. But when the friend arrived, the hiker wasn't there, and the friend assumed he had hiked back to the main road. Now, according to reports, here's what the man stated after regaining consciousness. Quote, I was hiking up the trail, and about halfway, I heard someone singing in the woods. I removed my earphones for a better listen. Then it became completely quiet. That's when I felt something hit me hard from behind, and I found myself rolling down the trail like a cannonball before losing consciousness. After that, I don't remember much of anything until being awoken in the hospital. My right shoulder had been dislocated, and I suffered a concussion during the incident. But miraculously, there were no cuts or bite marks consistent with animal predation. The strangest thing about all of this was being found at the top of the trail, well over a mile from where this all happened. The man went on to state that he believes something removed all of his clothing and personal items before carrying him to where he was discovered. But authorities believe the man did this on his own accord, given the confused state of mind he must have been in. They also believe a mountain lion was responsible for the attack, even though the evidence doesn't back this up. But regardless of what happened, you gotta admit it's all pretty bizarre, and has completely changed how we do our hiking routine. Thank you for sharing the story, John. Story 4. My girlfriend and I were biking through the Waterton Canyon in Colorado last August when something really disturbing occurred. We were riding through a section of trail surrounded by steep meadows and grassland that cuts right between two beautiful mountains and forest for as far as the eye can see. She was about 30 to 40 feet ahead of me when out of nowhere, something unseen leaped onto her from the right, sending her and her bike somersaulting down that grassy slope in a cloud of dirt and debris. I remember hearing the cries of agony and the grunts of pain being muffled by the twisted sound of aluminum and some kind of animalistic snarl. It was as frightening as it was surreal to see, seemingly in slow motion when it happened. I ditched my bike and chased after the rolling mess, trying to help in any way I could. By the time it stopped and I had caught up to her, I saw the bloody scratches that covered her arms and her legs, along with what looked like claw marks, about 3 to 4 inches long in streaks of 4. But whatever had caused her to wreck was now gone and had disappeared into the grass. My girlfriend is tougher than nails, and even though she was able to pull through and get back on that bike a few moments later, she was traumatized by whatever had tackled her. Even though she couldn't see it, she described the feeling of this thing as being more human than animal, and that it had long bony appendages that wrapped itself around her abdomen and torso. When we arrived back at the trailhead, we discussed what it could or couldn't have been, but are still perplexed. It was real alright, and had the ability to blend in with the natural world around it. Probably the worst type of predator anyone could imagine. It's as bizarre as it is unbelievable, and my girlfriend still has the scars to remind her of that frightening encounter, both physically and emotionally. Thank you, Calvin. Story 5. If I wasn't sure before whether or not I believed in coincidences, well, I sure as hell did after my experiences while hiking both the Pacific Crest Trail and the Appalachian Trail over the last 2 years. It all started while I was hiking through the Mount Hood portion of the Pacific Crest Trail in northern Oregon, as I was getting close to crossing over into Washington. At one point, I stopped to lace up my hiking boots, and when I looked up, I saw an average-looking Joe in his 50s making his way down the trail. I remember everything about him, as he walked by me without saying a single word. But before he did so, I just nodded and said hello, as I usually did. His eyes, red and weary, met mine, but he never said a word. He wore glasses, had a half-grain goatee, a farmer's hat, and standard teal and tan hiking apparel. I didn't think much of it at the time. In fact, I sort of laughed to myself on how someone could be so rude all the way out here in the middle of nowhere. I came across many other hikers on those trails during my hike, and every one of them acknowledged my presence, and I acknowledged theirs. It was a respectful thing to do, and everyone knew that. But this fella must have been the first one that hadn't. That's why I always remembered him. Oh well, I thought. Well, the following summer I traveled to the East Coast and hiked the upper portion of the Appalachian Trail between New Jersey and New York. I had stopped to rest at a small clearing in a thicket of woods with a clear view of the trail behind and in front of me. Well, as I was checking my inventory, I noticed a hiker making his way down the trail at an average pace, and as he drew near, I immediately recognized him. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was that same middle-aged average Joe that I saw the previous year while hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. Everything from the straw hat down to the outfit and the half-grain goatee. He hadn't changed a bit. It was then I felt a cold draft surround me as the man's eyes met mine again. Two red and weary, bloodshot eyes that stared coldly through those lenses, and before he could pass by, I called out to him, saying that I had seen him the previous year and how incredible it was. But the man just looked at me without saying a single word as he walked by. That man left a negative wave of energy on that trail behind him, and for the first time ever, I felt a sense of danger on that hike. I found myself clenching the pepper spray I kept in my belt until I could no longer see him. But I didn't waste any time getting out of there. After a solid hour of darting up that trail, I stopped to rest and collect myself. Now, what would be the chances of running into that creep thousands of miles away, out in the middle of nowhere? And why the hell didn't he respond? The whole situation was just too bizarre. Was he actually following me? Or was this just some kind of weird coincidence? I like to think it was, but my gut feeling tells me there was something more to it. And every time I hit the trail, I half expect to see the guy again, but let's hope not. Thanks for listening to my experience. J.J. Combs. And there you have it. Just a few more spooky and strange experiences to consider next time you find yourselves itching to get outdoors. Thanks for listening, and you'll hear from me soon. Good night.